Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. I have a great guest for you today. He's an author, YouTuber, podcaster, investigative journalist, Colin Flaherty. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thanks for the invite. Happy to be here.
Excellent. So, if people Google your name, you get kind of two different stories. On the one hand, people are accusing you of being some kind of hateful racist. On the other hand, your work has been endorsed from people like Thomas Sowell, Larry Elder, Alan West, and if they keep looking, they'll find that you were actually pivotal in helping release an innocent black man from prison. So tell us about who you are, just generally.
Well, who I am isn't that important. What I do is important.
True,
what I do is expose. What I do is expose this enormous level of black crime, black violence, black mayhem, anarchy, and violence. And then I show how reporters and public officials are in denial, deceit, and delusion about it, and how that creates a dangerous situation for so many people. So when we turn on the television, we see what we call the greatest lie of our generation, that black people are relentless victims of relentless white racism all the time, everywhere. That explains everything. What I do in my books and podcasts and articles and videos and interviews is we expose the greatest lie of this generation for what it is, just a big fairy tale.
What is your motivation for writing, really researching this subject? What inspired you to get involved in this?
Well, it's two different things, isn't it? Motivation and inspiration.
Sure. Both, if you don't mind. Or however you feel best to answer it.
Let me ask you this. What's your motivation for doing your podcast here?
I advocate for liberty, essentially, American liberty.
Okay, good. That's good. Good for me, too. Mm-hmm. The motivation doesn't really matter, does it?
Sure.
If I say the sun is out tomorrow, it's going to come out tomorrow, does my motivation matter? All that matters is what I say. Mm-hmm. I've written and spoken over 5 million words on this. Mm-hmm. And my motivation doesn't have anything to do with anything. It's a diversion. When you talk about a reporter's motivation, it's a diversion unless you find a pattern of things in there that are wrong. And then you can say, well, what's motivating Colin to get his facts wrong all the time? But see, what I'm motivated by is to get it right. Mm-hmm. And that's why, if you look through all the stuff people say about me, what they don't say is, Colin said, there was tons of episodes of large-scale black mob violence all over the country. He documented them, time, place, date, chapter, verse, what they did, how long they did it, and no one ever said, no, Colin got it right. That was wrong. That was a bunch of white people. And so what inspired me to do this was I thought I was out of the reporting racket. I had a long career in reporting, had a lot of notches on my belt, including getting a black dude out of prison, mm-hmm. who was falsely convicted, falsely accused, trying to kill his white girlfriend. I got him out. I was a hero on NPR, the LA Times, all these places then for doing that. It was a one-man show. This wasn't one of these deals where 20 reporters show up to a press conference and they all race back to their newsroom to see who can beat the other one by 1 minute. No, this was enterprise investigative reporting. I found one guy who I had reason to believe after my investigation was done that this guy was falsely accused of committing this crime and was convicted of it. So I showed how all that happened. So my brother and I were doing a talk radio show out of WDEL, Joe Biden's station in Wilmington, Delaware. Mm-hmm. And I saw in the paper, a big story in the paper, it said 13 Asian students taken to the emergency room. I thought, hey, maybe it's like some kind of, lunchroom thing. They got some bad mashed potatoes or something. So you read the story, read, you look at other places. Turns out there were 13 Asian students who were beaten by black students on a day at South Philadelphia High School where they decided that's what they were going to do that day. And you kept looking at it, and it turned out that it wasn't just one day where black students were harassing, threatening, taunting, assaulting, robbing Asian students. This was a daily occurrence at this 95% black school for years and years and years, daily. And when they went to their teacher, the principal, the security guards, even the superintendent of schools, everybody said there was nothing we could do about it. The superintendent of schools in Philadelphia gave them a flyer telling them how to behave around black people so they would not antagonize the black people, so the black people would not beat up the Asian people. So I was doing that story, and I asked other people in the newsroom, I said, that looks like a good old-fashioned race riot where they attacked all these Asian students. And everybody else in the newsroom, everybody assured me that race had nothing to do with that. And I knew that was a lie. I said, oh, then all this other stuff started happening. And it was all on YouTube, all on video. And so I started documenting the enormous difference between what a newspaper reporter or even a TV reporter would say happened. And then you go to a YouTube video and you see the truth. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
Yes, no, and that's, part of what I appreciate about your work is that I think even in the first book that you wrote about it, you say right off the bat, hey, I'm not proposing causes, I'm not proposing solutions, just facts. Here's the video, here's the news report on it. You compare and, you tell me what happened, essentially, which is, essentially that's just as objective reporting as you can get, in my opinion.
Charlie, it's weird because it's like, I'm not asking anybody to look at Colin Flaherty and say, yeah, I believe him, I'll take his word for it. No, I'm not asking anybody to take my word for it. I'm just saying, watch that video. Take the video word for it. And that's what makes it so powerful.
Yes, absolutely. Really, and this is kind of the central point, the reason I wanted to have you on is that, we had discussed kind of off the air, kind of one of my intentions is to build a coalition of like-minded, liberty-minded people. And race is obviously a factor in this. I've had a lot of intelligent black conservatives on who've made some really interesting points to me, and it kind of opened my eyes to some things that I had not considered before. And one of these things, and I think you're kind of caught in this one particular trap, where your work, when I read your work, it reads like a story of telling about media negligence in reporting on things. And for too many people, that message, I don't think, is getting there to them. What they're getting caught up on is this issue of race. And so they look at you and they say, oh, you're only doing this for black people. You're for one way or another, they assume your motives, and they assume that you are what you're really saying in your books is that black people, by virtue of race, by virtue of who they are, they're criminals, they're animals, they're blah, blah, this and that. And I don't think that is your message, but correct me if I'm wrong.
I'll tell you what, it would save you a lot of time if instead of just making up criticisms you think other people have said, why don't you directly quote somebody who says something instead of just making stuff up that nobody's actually said? That's what people do in the big leagues. So instead of saying like, oh, I understand that some people said that you are fill in the blank for the worst possible thing you can be. Mm-hmm. No, you have to really come at it with a specific thing, or else that's just you making it up. That's a conversation, not just somebody making crap up. So don't make crap up with me. That's not the way we play here. Well, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm a little confused.
Okay, well, here, I'll straighten you out.
Sure.
One, there are lots of people, and I document this, how people are in denial, deceit, and delusion about this level of black crime and violence, the greatest lie of our generation. I document it. And for a lot of people, it's like they'll do anything not to look at it, not to talk about it, not to acknowledge it. The favorite thing they do is to divert from these horrific acts of crime, violence, anarchy, mayhem, chaos that I document, easy to find. It's not like this is the greatest investigative project in the world. No, these are on the surface. Mm-hmm. And so the favorite thing people in denial, deceit, delusion want to do is go to causes and solutions, because all of a sudden, instead of talking about what's happening now, we're talking about something that happened in 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And instead of talking about what happened now, they're talking about, well, Colin, have you considered my 1 million point plan with 1 million pages on it? Well, and I said, well, it's been tried 1 million times and it's failed 1 million times. Yeah, no, Colin, I got it right this time, finally. And so to me, if you're going to talk about black crime, violence, wildly out of proportion, I think we've got a lot of solutions at hand that have been shown to work, i.e., if somebody conks you on the head they got to go to jail.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
we do not have to sit there and pretend like they are nice people that we can resuscitate. We'll let them figure it out. We'll let them get their own lives back on track. In the meantime, while that guy's in jail, he's not going to go around clunking anybody else on the head. And so a lot of people freak out by that. A lot of people are just so caught up in this whole, they're so afraid of talking about race. They're just walking on eggshells, and it's always something. So it's something like, well, Colin, I don't like the way you put that comma in that last sentence in your book. That's why you're a bad person. No, that's not how you evaluate people. That when they're bringing a serious subject to people's attention, you look at it, you take specific examples, and you say, "No, Colin got that wrong." No, actually, here's the only couple things. Here's what people do say: A, it never happened. B, white people do it too. C, white people deserve it. Those are the only three criticisms, and none of them are valid. So we got people out there that are just freaked out, that just will not look at this and go. I mean, they'll look at me in the eye and go, "Colin, black crime and white crime, it's all the same, Colin. I'm colorblind. It doesn't make any difference." People don't. Those kind of people are dangerous. They simply do not acknowledge, for a black person, how their whole entire life is centered around race. How part of that centering around race, we call them fellas on my platform. The fellas are just not that into white people. Not hard to see. Turn on MSNBC. Turn on anything. NPR, MSNBC. I don't care. CNN. The newspaper. Look at the black media. You'll see that there's so much racial resentment against white people. But, we've been trained, you and I have been trained that when, if we feel a spark of something called racism inside of us, we have to dial 911, get the fire hoses out here, and put it out. When black people are having the same conversation about how much white people suck, they're not looking around. They're not lowering their voices. Their eyes are not going back and forth. They're not seeing their entire career flash in front of their eyes. Those are the consequences for white people and Asian people telling the truth about race and racial violence in this country. Freaks people out. That's why I wrote the book in a very plain fashion, a very easy to read fashion. And when you're done reading it, you can say lots of things about it. That Colin's a bad person, that this is bad, that's bad. But you can't say anything in that book is wrong.
Sure, yeah, and that's not my argument here. I guess what I want your commentary on, your opinion on, is that, I guess the issue is that people, when they're reading, they're reading your books, it's all just facts, as you point out, but I think people are assuming then that, and by assuming, they're not getting the message from the book. I don't think you're a hateful racist person. I think you're a guy just making observations about media reporting and, the differences in how things are reported. I don't think that's, to some degree, we're talking about the subject of black violence. And, if we can't talk, if the subject of black crime and black violence is off the table, if that's inherently racist, then, then the bar for whatever racism means, it doesn't even exist. So, I sympathize with that. But what I'm saying is that I think that's what's happening to you, is that I think you spend a lot of time, and as you should, you take a lot of pride in being a truth teller. And I think that the reason you write these books is to get a message out, to make some kind of effectual change that I think we all agree with. We don't want to live in a violent society, and we don't want to see the things that you've documented in your book. But I just think a better, or maybe not a better way, but whatever your thoughts are, I think part of the problem is just the message isn't there. That idea of establishing. Go ahead.
Yeah, here's the thing. I get it. For the last 60 years, the journalistic approach to this problem of black violence has been to apologize, to walk on eggshells, treat with kid gloves, and constantly soft pedal what is a very, very dangerous topic for a lot of people in the real life. So I get it. When I wrote the book, I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to apologize. I'm not going to soft pedal this. People are getting hurt every day. Some people are getting hurt because the press paints a false picture of what their neighborhood looks like or what their town looks like. when, like, for example, I did a story out of Chicago where they released a white girl from a 20-year-old white girl, a California girl. They released her into the ghetto of Chicago, South Chicago. That's where the jail is. This is the nastiest ghetto in America. They released her. No phone, no money. And it turns out she had kind of some mental issues. So she's wandering around the streets of South Chicago. Next thing you know, she's being raped and tossed out of a 7-story window where she survived. Her parents sue the city. The judge, in a judgment, and they brought a Harvard sociologist in. On the witness stand, he said, a white person in a black neighborhood can routinely expect to be the victim of violence. That's called routine activity theory. In his ruling in favor of the family, giving the largest personal injury case ever against the city of Chicago, $22.4 million, the judge said it would have been better to take that woman to the Chicago Zoo and put her in a lion's cage rather than release that white woman into a black neighborhood. You know, those are facts.
Yeah, that's a horrible
and there's no way to self-peddle them. So if there's people out there who have a hard time in their denial delusion, if they have trouble dealing with the facts, I'll talk to any one of them on any platform at any time. But that's their problem, not mine.
Sure, absolutely. And I think that...
So why don't you get one of them on your show and say, listen, you said this, you said that. Flaherty shows 100% opposite of what you say. How do you explain that?
No, sure. And believe me, I get this hard line, shoving facts down people's throats kind of messaging. I get that. As someone who is like, I'm trying to build bridges with like-minded people. And when I talk to them, where I find someone who agrees with me on policy on 99% of the stuff, and yet they are voting for someone that, we would both disagree with, when I talk to them about that, it's that they have other, they say, oh, well, if, like in your case, they'll say, well, if you support Colin Flaherty and he's a racist because this and that. And I'm just like, well, where did you get that from? And, it'll be some kind of media report. It'll be like, well, look how he talks about black people and this and that. And I'm like, okay, well, you're making a really strong assumption that he is this kind of racist and everything. And, I don't see it grounded in your writings at all. But
so that's the most powerful. What you did is the most powerful thing anybody can do. Is you look at somebody and you go, well, could you give me an example of that? What do you mean by that? Give me an example. That's death for those people.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. But, it's almost like if facts alone were enough to effectuate the changes that you and I want to see in America, I don't think it's enough to just point out the facts. I think you have to also be mindful in how you articulate it. And it's not to soft pedal it, not to diminish the truth or the impact at all. No, I'm saying to articulate it in a way where it has more power and has more impact, because if you can do that and actually change someone's mind.
Give me an example of that.
I've done it on the podcast. I think I've had some people on who were kind of, or I should say listeners, who I'm not comfortable naming on here, but, they were more hardline to the left. And after kind of listening to the podcast and stuff, they've kind of come around and, they're not diehard conservatives, no, but they're voting for Trump now. And they kind of see things, they see the political left a little differently. And I would have never reached those people if I was just kind of doing the classic Bob Grant style of kind of interacting with people by people
have been trying the earnest, sincere, let's just friends, can we sit down and reason together for 50, 60, 100 years when it comes to race relations. You tell me, has it made things better or has it made things worse?
I don't know. I think my perspective on this is rather limited, but
there's been 1,000 riots in America in the last 60 days in the name of the greatest lie of our generation. So I'll ask you again, has it made things better or worse?
I mean, if
1,000 riots.
Yeah, no, I'm not denying any of that. I'm just saying that you say that these kind of honest conversations are happening. I don't really see them happening outside of places like here and Joe Rogan Experience and, most of the stuff. Like if you turn on any news network, and they have debates, they have two people on Each guy has probably 30 seconds to make a point. They talk over each other. They're not trying to kind of find any common ground. They're not trying to actually explore each other's opinions about things. The same thing with presidential debates. I mean, they're a clown show at this point. And I think a lot of people are frustrated. And I think it's imperative to have conversations like these where we sit down and we go through that stuff. It might be tedious. It might be, not I guess what we want to do in terms of just throwing facts out there. But, we're like you said, we've been doing this for a long time, and we've had these insane riots over the last 60 days. What do we have to lose? I mean, if we know, I mean, it goes back to basic psychology.
What do we have to lose by doing the same thing over and over again that's led us to this destination? Well, that question answers itself.
Well, I think perhaps maybe we have a difference of opinion on kind of how we've been talking about these things over the last 50 years or so. I think people are more polarized now than ever, and they're not taking the time to actually explore people's thoughts and their opinions and stuff, and clarifying their positions so that that people's characters are not questionable. And I think that's
that's not happening. When you first sent me an email to be on the show, there were about 3 major red flags in your email that I mentioned to you in a response. I may have been a little bit too hard on you. But the first major red flag is, let's have a conversation, Colin, about this. Well, nobody wants to have a conversation about race in America because, like just the other day, for example, Fox News had one, Oprah had one, virtually indistinguishable. The only conversation was, let's answer this question. How much do white people suck? How much do white people hurt black people every day, every minute of every day? There is no conversation. It's all monologue. It's all one-sided monologues and lectures.
Yes.
So when I hear people say, I'd like to have a conversation with you, Colin, 99 times out of 100, that's not actually true.
Mm-hmm. Sure, yeah, and I hope I'm the exception to the rule. I hope I mitigated.
The jury is still out.
Gotcha. Okay. But yeah, no, I mean, I sympathize with you, especially in terms of like what I would call just this utter white hatred in our culture. I mean, I see it all the time on Twitter. Sarah Jeong from the New York Times is another example. I mean, even recently, there was a student from Georgia University, some teacher assistant, who literally said, I have actually the article right here, that's why I'm thinking about it now. Some white people have to die for black communities to be made whole. I'm confused why that is so controversial. It's just a fact of history that racial justice often comes at the cost of white life. I didn't advocate for, that's a joke. I didn't advocate for violence. I was just honest of racial progress. Oh my God.
You know who also said that almost word for word? And what I do is I like to focus on how this is all mainstream now, not just some nut job on a street corner
it's
about them before. So the one person who said that quite famously was a young lady by the name of Oprah Winfrey. I use this on my podcast all the time, where Oprah goes, she's talking about the prospects for the future, and she just says, listen, all white people, they're just not redeemable. They're just, before we make progress, they are just going to have to die.
Oprah said that?
I never say anything without being willing to wager on it.
Oh, okay. No, I never heard
right now. See what you come up with. Oprah says white people have to die. Google that. See what you come up with.
I'm going to.
Get about 100 hits.
That's incredible. I did not know that. But again, like I said, so you don't think that kind of establishing your motives and taking the time to clarify positions for people who might be a little bit defensive because of other things they've heard, you don't think there's any value in that? No,
because it's always going to be something. Like the other day, I had somebody I grew up with who's a card-carrying social justice warrior. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to get into it with her, but we got into it. And I just started asking her questions. I said, okay, what about mass shootings? Yeah, that's a white person thing. 75% of mass shooters are black. She literally didn't believe that. I said, well, I'll bet you on it, and I'll prove it within 2 minutes by showing you the story from the New York Times, which I did. Mm-hmm. She didn't care. She didn't believe it. So there are some people on the question of race whose minds are just steel traps that closed a long time ago. And to sit there and focus our attention on how are we going to open up these closed, dangerously closed minds, no, that's not what I'm doing. I'm telling the truth without fear or favor I'm not worried about how it's going to be received. I'm just trying to make it easy to consume. And if people are ready for it, that's great. If they're not, that's not my problem.
Okay, no, I understand that. I get that position. I guess so the purpose of your writings, like I said, a lot of people, when I read it, I find that it's just very fact-based. Hey, there's no cause, no solutions, just here are the facts, and, you do with it what you will. Correct me, your book, none of the stuff in your book is to suggest that race is a determining factor to one's proclivity to engage in violent crime. Is that a fair assessment?
I don't use the word proclivity. I don't use tendency. I don't use any things that introduce an element of uncertainty, and they introduce an element of kind of like forecasting the future. I don't do the future thing. I don't do the mind reading thing. What I do is say, this is happening right now. And it's been happening this way for a long time. So you can take from it whatever you want, but I'm very careful with my language, and I'm very careful to say we have a huge problem in this country, black crime, violence, and an even bigger problem with reporters, public officials, and other people in denial, deceit, and delusion about it. I mean, look at the riots. We had 1,000 riots over the last 60 days. Mm-hmm. All the riots, there were some white people in these riots, but all the riots have been in the name of Black Lives Matter. That's the greatest lie of our generation. So I'm just out here exposing it. I'm not overly worried about what the fools who are in denial. But here's the thing. There's always a limit to people's denial, right? Mm-hmm. So, like the person that was denying some things I was telling her the other day that were facts I had on the tips of my fingertips. I mean, she lives in the whitest of white neighborhoods. So she could say none of this exists, but at the same time, she's not going down to the black part of Wilmington, Delaware for a barbecue on Friday night at 9 o'clock. She's not going down there to shop or to go to church or to buy a car. She's not sending her kids down there to go to school. Yeah. So there's always a limit to people's denial about how much they're in denial about this incredible level of black crime and violence in this country.
Sure. No, and I agree with that. I mean, I think we largely agree on these things. I mean, even if you, like we kind of talked about earlier, I mean, when you look at the stats of black violent crime, it is disproportionately committed by black Americans. I don't think there's anything wrong, with discussing that. I don't think it's racist to discuss that. And I don't think it's hateful to discuss basic numbers. But again, if you're trying to communicate with people, at least from my perspective, I think it's worth it to take the time to make the case to people about kind of where you're coming from, and that you don't get everyone, and that's fine. You're not supposed to get everyone.
You might as well. You know what? You're just like you're like the kid walking around the schoolyard that has a sign on his back that says "Kick me."
Ooh, no, not me, brother. Definitely not me. I promise you that.
That's you. Because you're going, Colin, you have to explain yourself. You have to explain
why I'm not saying you have to.
Bad person. No, Colin, you have to explain why you're a good person.
I'm not saying you have to.
People like you now. That's not the way the world works when it comes to race. Listen, I write these books saying X, Y, and Z, and then people say I'm a bad person. I deal with that. But here's the thing. They say the same thing. Do you believe in racial quotas?
Like affirmative action?
Yeah.
No, I do not.
You believe that black people should be given 400 extra points on their SATs when they go to a private college or a public college?
No, I do not.
So all of a sudden, if just those two things alone, you cross the threshold. You are a bad person. Nobody cares what else. You're a bad person, just as bad as Colin at his worst. So you can apologize all you want, but
I'm not apologizing.
And it doesn't make any difference.
No, I think you're misunderstanding me. I'm not apologizing, and I'm not saying you have to do anything. I'm just saying, in terms of strategy, I think that if we want to see, again, the changes, the reason you write these books is because you want to stop the stuff that you're talking about. And
here's the thing. Here's the saying.
Sure.
The strategy is for amateurs. Execution is for professionals. So just give me an example of you or somebody performing this great strategic pivot where you can expose this unbelievable level of crime and violence and denial, deceit, and delusion among black people doing so much damage. Give me an example of somebody's doing it the right way.
I mean, when I think about the great, I mean, the one person that comes to mind is Jesus. I mean, he went to sinners, essentially. He hung out with people who other people said you shouldn't talk to. Don't talk to these guys. They're horrible people. And no, he went there anyway, and he was genuine with them at the least. I mean, he went above and beyond that. But, I think it's a lot of people could give me flack for having you on, but I think it's worth having you on to at least explore and say, hey, what is going on here? What's the truth here?
Okay, and could you give me an example of someone who's actually alive?
I mean, I'm doing that now. I'll use myself as an example.
Okay, give me an example of what you've written that has changed hearts, and written, talked, or said that's changed hearts and minds, and didn't, and everybody said, wow, that dude's a great guy. I don't believe it exists, to tell you the truth.
Well,
because you're not doing anything people haven't been doing for 60 years. Friends, let us reason together.
Well, who's been doing that exactly? I mean, like, I think of myself.
That's the dominant paradigm in the media for the last 60 years on race.
In the media? The media has not. I don't think the media has done a good job at talking about race. They've been the ones polarizing it. They've done a horrible job on it, in my opinion.
They've been the ones pumping this false narrative of black victimization.
Yeah, but they're not doing what I'm describing. They're not actually having actual conversations about things. They're out there pushing an agenda. They've been doing that for decades. I don't see anyone in the media, in prominent media, doing what I'm doing and kind of doing it in the way that I'm doing it.
Okay, well,
unless you can point to someone. I mean, I can't think of anyone off the top of my head. I would listen to him if that was the case.
Okay, so let's just say you're the only man in America who's talking about race in an effective fashion. You just proved my point. That's not the way it rolls.
Well, I don't have a great reach like you do, or like most people. I'm still, in the very beginnings of whatever this is. Who knows? I mean, if I could get my message out there to more people, who knows what'll change? I mean, it's hard to tell. But I mean, the way I see it, though, if we keep going in this same direction, I mean, look what we're seeing. We're seeing Antifa, we're seeing Groypers, and we're seeing Nick Fuentes types. We're seeing, we're getting more divided, and I don't see anyone really changing the formula, because I see the news doing the same thing they've always done. I see media reporters doing the same thing they've always done. And sure, this isn't, my style isn't exactly throw facts in people's face, and if you don't like it, then screw off. I don't think that's really effective. And I think that if you want to see changes, you have to try other things that work, and trial and error. I don't see what's wrong with that
The
approach.
other night in Chicago, black people threw rocks, bricks, and bottles and hurt 59 policemen in Chicago. How would you talk about that?
I would say that just as you described it.
You wouldn't say, well, they probably had a good reason.
No, not those people. No, and I'm not
driving their pain.
No.
I feel your pain, brothers and sisters.
No, I'm not talking about those people. No, those people. I'm with you on those guys are criminals. They should go to jail. They're destroying property and hurting people. Yeah, I have no sympathy for that. Prosecute them to the full extent of the law. Those aren't my target audience. I think there are, especially for Black Americans, I think a lot of Black Americans feel when people talk about these issues that they're talking about them. And so that turns them off from whatever your message is, which might be an agreeable message. I think that we have to be, not careful, but we just have to be mindful of that kind of stuff.
So here's the thing. So we know that at least 1/3 of black men will spend time in prison. So that's one cohort. Then we're talking about black people now. How many black people believe that those people that when black people go to prison, it's largely because of racism? So there's a lot of people, committing crime. There's a lot of people enabling crime. I just put those people all in the same group and say, there's some bad business going on out there, and there's way too many black people who are just okay with it. And I'm sorry, we got to call that out. There's no other way to do it than to call that out. If you have a criminal level mayor like you do in Chicago, overwhelmingly receive the black vote. All these black mayors, all the mayors in the worst cities in the country all receive, 80, 90, 95% of the black vote. Does that have any larger meaning?
Well, I've looked into that. I've talked to a lot of prominent black conservatives, like I said, and what I've learned is that, again, it's this issue of messaging. It's the, kind of like a Candace Owens type of thing. When you address a certain race a certain way, especially when they have kind of their own culture, that they have their own kind of there's different geographies and cultures that influence how they think and feel and, their characters and everything, just like applies to all of us. And what I've learned is that for the majority of them, when you talk about black on black crime or when you talk about these things, it's already kind of assumed that you're implying that by virtue of being black, you're already more predisposed to crime, predisposed to violence, this and that. And so they think that that's where you're coming from. And then that's the source, as far as I can tell, of the accusations of racism and the accusations of, this and that. And it's like, if we can get over that barrier, if we can communicate with the majority of black Americans on that, I think we can, again, then you can see a change in voting and a change in reality.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the dish ran away with the spoon. Back in 2016, Hillary Clinton went around reminding white people that white people do not listen to black people. Now, the first time I ever heard Hillary say that, she said it a dozen times. First time I heard her say it, I got kind of annoyed and I said, well, I don't like that. And I thought about it more and more often. And the more I thought about it, the truer it became. White people don't listen to black people. They are screaming at us that they're not into us. They're screaming at us that they believe crime should be a black entitlement. Black people shouldn't go to prison for being in crime because they're really just victims of racism, not anything else. They're screaming this at us. They're just not into this whole thing we call the United States of America. And we're not paying attention. You're not paying attention. If you think there's like some way we can tweak the messaging so fellas and lovely ladies will all of a sudden stop carjacking, stop home invading, stop robbing, stop killing, stop looting, stop raping out of, black on white rape versus white on black rape is 10,000, 20,000 to 1. How do you explain that?
I mean,
how do you sugarcoat that?
No, I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything, and that's not my target. I mean, I don't think I'm not trying to convince those people of anything, because I think that people who are going to do that stuff, they weren't even in the game in the first place. I guess, I don't know. I disagree. I just think that, you kind of have this picture that this is black America, that they're all criminal, or not all criminals. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Okay, now here's where the big boys do. Now, here's when you make an accusation that I said something. Colin, I imagine you said this, but I can't really look at it.
No,
even though it's written and spoken 5 million words on it, I think I'll just have to make up what you just said, Colin. That's not how the big boys and girls play. That's how the people were trying to be big boys. So tell me what I said. Show me where I said anything remotely like that.
No, you never have, and I didn't mean to imply that you said that.
No, listen, you don't get count. You don't get credit. Nobody gets credit for good intentions in this game. You do it or you don't.
Well, I guess let me ask you this. Go ahead.
Okay, if you're going to come at me saying, Colin, it seems to me. No, we don't play the seems game.
Okay,
we
fine.
play the what's happening game. We don't play the I read black people's mind and here's what they're thinking. We don't play that game either. We watch what they do, what they say. A lot of that out there.
Sure. No, and I agree with that.
Okay, there was an article in HuffPo. There was an article, 4 of these articles last year in major places, including the Huffington Post, Black Voices, New York Times, Rio, the Root, and Grio. It was all about this epidemic of rape among black women. The numbers are crazy. 65, 70% of black women are raped before they ever go to college. 90, 95% of those rapes are never reported. So all these places did stories on that. And the gist of the stories were done by black women. The gist of the story was, hey, black women, why are we accepting this level of rape and sexual violence against us? Huffington Post said something I'll never forget. They said black women are trained at an early age to protect the race at all costs. Oh, by the way, all 4 of those major stories from the New York Times to the Huffington Post, all 4, they did present the reason why there is so much black rape against black women. It's all because they learned it from white people. Those are facts.
Interesting. Let me ask you this. Do you think there should be a strategy in terms of like a Republican political strategy to reach out to black Americans to try and take back some of these cities that have been Democrat strongholds for a long time to effectuate better policies? Is that something that's worthwhile, like a worthwhile investment?
So I talk about this on my podcast a lot. Mm-hmm. That's what Republicans have been trying for the last 60 years. Every 4 years, they find some black people, trot them out, and they go, hey, I'm black, and Republicans actually give us a better deal than Democrats. That's why you should vote for them. And then the Republicans come out, slap them on the back, and everybody confidently predicts that all the black people are going to vote Republican this year because Democrats suck. So that's what Trump is trying this year. And my question I ask on my podcast is, if it's happening, I don't see it. I just want somebody to show me like an election, even a small election. We have lots of elections in this country. Off year, off November, on November. Lots of elections where if black people were going to leave the Democrat Party and vote for Trump-style candidates, they have had plenty of chances to do it. Heretofore, they have not taken anybody up on that chance. So when you talk about effectuating policy, this is what people that are way smarter than you and I have been doing for a very long time without any result.
Well, let me give you some of my own personal experience with it. I was involved with trying to help a black man try to get in a position to be mayor at a city. And what I discovered is that the Republican Party there really, they all but gave up in that area. And when I started talking to more and more people, this seemed to be a common theme among the cities. And it was very discouraging. And I just thought, the Democrats, they invest in Texas, they invest in red states, they invest in trying to turn cities. They play the small game. They go into cities and they try to turn red states blue from the inside out. And I don't see that same effort at the national level with Republicans trying to help out these local candidates that would ultimately make life better for everyone with better policies.
They've been doing the turning the states from Republican to Democrat through immigration. That's how.
Well, that's also true.
It's not some sophisticated, let's put a bunch of money in there, our message will resonate. That's not, no. And so when people are thinking about putting some money into a Republican candidate, black or white, the only thing that people that give money want to know is this. You have a chance of winning. If you do, I might give you some money. But if you're not a good candidate, if you haven't done your homework, if you just show up and say, I'm the guy, so it's your duty to support me, those guys never win. They never get the support they want.
Interesting. All right. I guess let's start wrapping it up here. I got a couple final questions for you. Are you currently working on anything new? Any other new books?
Well, I've got 2 books in the can. I'm having some health issues, so my energy is a little low, but I'm working on 2 books. One is my 25 favorite hoaxes, racial hoaxes. People say they were victims of white racism and violence when it was just 100% incorrect. They just made it up. And 2, I'm writing a book collecting letters I get from people who are victims of black crime and violence. And the name of that book is something that a bunch of black people said when they were beating the crap out of a white guy on the streets of Philadelphia. He looked up and he said, "Why are you doing this? Why are you beating me up?" And they said, "It's not our fault. You can't fight." So I got 2 books. My podcast is going great. I'm spending a lot of time on my Twitter these days, Twitter live stream. So my books are going crazy. I had a great month on all my books, even though people have been trying to ban them and all this other good stuff. So that's the long story of that.
Okay. And final question: what would you say to a person who's on the fence about you and your work based on the things that he's heard from other people?
Well, everybody has to experience it for themselves. And here's the thing about my work, whether it's a podcast or especially the videos and the books, they're different platforms for different kinds of people. Once you see them, they cannot be unseen. Once you see episode after episode of a bunch of black people attacking Asian people, gay people, straight people, young people, old people, Eskimo, Amish, kitties, puppies, turtles, chiropractors, chickens. Once you see how black mob violence, I haven't even talked about that much, so wildly out of proportion. And once I show that to you beyond a shadow of a doubt, you're going to freak and you're going to go back into your shell and go, man, I can't call him. He's too negative. I can't handle that. But you can't unsee it. And all of a sudden, the world's going to be coming at you in a slightly different way. And you're not going to be able to be in denial like you were. So sometimes it takes people a little while to figure out. But, that's the way it is.
Excellent. Colin, thank you so much for coming on. I greatly appreciate it.
All the best to you.
Okay, till next time, guys.